right, howdy everybody. Welcome back to this week's episode of Watching Privacy with Brett and Raju. And let's see, I think we've had a lot actually pop up this week in terms of privacy. But right off the bat, I know one of the things that came up was the Ohio legislature, I guess, proposed a bill for data protection, Ohio Personal Privacy Act, OPA, which is fairly similar to, I guess, what California and Virginia have done. A couple of the notes that I saw about it was, I think last week or the week before, we talked about how, these privacy compliance issues could really adversely affect smaller businesses who don't really have the bandwidth or the budget for compliance measures. So it was good to see that they had a stipulation in there that it applies to businesses with 25 million or more in gross revenue, which sounds good on the surface, but then also seems a little risky because just because you make less revenue doesn't mean you should be less or more careless with your tools. And I would argue that the less revenue you make, the more likely you are to use tools that share data and then not be informing your customers. But I guess kind of a critical mass to make it. What did you guys think about that kind of revenue threshold for kind of compliance? Is that a good thing or so-so or unknown?
I think the idea of it is a good thing. I don't know if the exact number is, the right threshold, but you got to start somewhere, right? And I think it's at least it alleviates, some of the pressure that might have been put on very small businesses, because this is a whole, not only a kind of a mindset or a corporate mindset change. You have to actually understand it and then implement it. And this at least gives smaller companies a little bit more time to try to figure it out. And I think the more time you give them, the better off they're going to be. And maybe that kind of a threshold allows for the smaller businesses to get a little bit more opportunity to get up to speed with all this.
And the threshold will likely vary by state and of course by country, as we see all of those. But the reality is obvious. Every business will have to care about privacy sooner or later, and I think that's where we are headed. So it's just a matter of time before we see these additional rules, and for small businesses, that's additional burden to carry.
Yeah, the fragmentation state by state is going to be a complete nightmare. There's no way this pans out and it works well, right? Let's say in Ohio, it's 25 million, maybe in California, it's 10 million, in Texas, it's 1 million, right? And then you're selling and you're doing business in all these states online, right? You have an online shop or an online store, online presence for something, where you get jurisdiction, how the controls work. Just there's no way it doesn't end up as a nightmare with 50 different rules for 50 different, use cases and basically, what do you call it? Legalese that someone has to parse through and figure out, right? And I think we know where this will go. Then you'll have a uptick of, compliance as a service offerings that basically will try to parse all of those and then charge a small business in order to navigate them. And then, hopefully it just happens at the national level and it clears it out. But I don't know if we really see that in the pipeline. And the Ohio one is still just proposed. I don't think it's definitely hasn't been voted on or anything. So where we see now those 25 million numbers and things like that could easily evolve over time. And I guess we'll have to see where it ends up.
I think one thing I'm noticing is, the data privacy conscious ones are the ones that will opt to operate from certain locations. And I'm noticing it where there are some customers who like their data to be in Europe, actually, because the data rules are stricter, and they come and say, hey, can we have my data in European data centers, because the country I'm in, they don't have good protection rules, and I want that data to be protected and covered by those rules. So those are things that are something that we're starting to see, but increasingly, I won't be surprised if that becomes common within certain regions.
I would like just to be the first to propose the United States bill. We could call it the Taegis Privacy Act.
I don't know where
Taegis
comes from.
I don't know, but if ever there was the perfect expression on someone's face for this bill, that's it, man.
I mean, who's happy about any bill, I guess, right? I think it was me just like scrutinizing what this bill will actually be and how many loopholes and stuff that will actually end up being carved out of it. That's really why I was squinting so hard into it. But I guess speaking of looking into things, I guess there was an article which I guess shouldn't really even, I thought it was kind of common knowledge, but there was this article I saw on The Verge about Amazon and how they have access to all these corporate buildings, basically apartment complexes, commercial buildings, whatever, through basically their delivery system. And so I think it was Amazon has key for thousands of buildings. And the corporate building will either put in one of those Amazon boxes as an amenity or whatever, but ultimately, Amazon has access or access to commercial buildings and residential buildings, apartment complexes, or things along those lines. But then they also have that I think it's Amazon Key, if I'm not mistaken, where if you get one of their smart garage openers, I don't know if it applies to the locks that they bought. I think they own Yale locks, if I'm not mistaken, or they own a lock company, I'm pretty sure. And so the garage door opener for sure, if you have one of those, the delivery guy can pop open that garage door opener and then drop the box in and close the garage door. And allegedly that's all they can do. But you still are giving access to it, right? Which then kind of goes down the rabbit hole of they bought Ring, and there's a big thing about Ring cameras and their tie-ups with local police and like data sharing that they have. So ultimately, let's say the authorities have access to your garage door information, your apartment complex access on top of the cameras that you have in your house. Essentially that's surveillance and access, really, right? There's no coming around that one.
It's just a matter of time before they acquire a password management company, so they'll have access to both digital and physical keys.
Oh yeah, that's a good way of putting it, digital and physical.
That's a lot of access, man. I mean, look, I'm a big Amazon guy in terms of, I buy a lot of stuff. I have a lot of this stuff, but I'm not ready for that yet, and I'm also not ready for the one where they want to use lasers or radar for when you're sleeping. I'm not into that one yet either. So I'll just say that, man. I got to draw the line somewhere with this.
I mean, the only time you're not sleeping is, I guess, time you can't be shopping on Amazon, right? It's kind of how Netflix says their biggest competitor is sleep, not really anything else. But yeah, the Amazon stuff is always different. And then there was another actual thing I saw in New York Times too about kind of the rise of QR codes, I guess, in restaurants. I mean, generally, I think the U.S. has been behind on QR codes for a long time. I've been to, in the East, in China, Japan, even in India, a lot of restaurants have QR codes, and it's a pretty common thing. But it always seemed so foreign, and I don't think it was really until the iPhone kind of had a native QR code scanner that it really blew up a lot more. There was always like third-party apps you could use, but nobody's downloading that. And then Androids, I think, had the feature for quite some time, but in the States, I guess nobody really cared about that being a market driver. But now, you go to any restaurant and QR codes are there. And then you kind of go down the path of the smaller the, restaurant, how they kind of manage that online menu option. I've been to restaurants where you scan the QR code and it goes straight to a PDF and it just takes me to the PDF version of the menu. And that's great, fine and dandy. But I've also been to restaurants where you scan the QR code and it takes you to one of these, I don't know what the exact term is, but it's kind of like it's called a menu as a service, because I'm sure that's probably a term by now, where you can order online. It's an interactive menu where you can filter by like appetizers and entrees and stuff along those lines. And then that's where it gets a little bit tricky, right? Because anytime you're loading up a site, you've now got location data. You've now got all your they're dropping a cookie and they know other pages you're going to. And then those prices you're seeing are no longer dynamic. At least in the PDF, I know I'm paying straight prices, right? But imagine in a restaurant, you started getting dynamic prices for how much you would pay for a soft drink, right? There's no way that it doesn't go to that. It doesn't lead to that path, basically, as data is collected from simply just looking at a menu. Something that, and the worst part I think about the menus at a restaurant was really the first thing you do at a restaurant is now you have to whip out your phone and scan. You go to a restaurant, you want to eat with somebody, let's just put the phones down, face down. Sometimes like me and my friends will play a game. Everyone puts their phone in the middle of the table. First person to pick it up either, picks up the tab or has to like chip in or, buy around or do whatever. But some tax for doing that. But now you have to get on your phone, and the first 10 minutes you're sitting at a table, everyone just scanned the QR code and is like hunched over on their phone reading the menu, right? It's not like you're not really having a interactive thing anymore. But they say that it cuts down on labor costs. I'm not really sure how it does, but the quote was something like 40-50% of labor costs is reduced by digital menus. I'd like to see that study, because I'm not really sure how it could make that big of an impact. Have you guys seen these things or interacted with them or had any tricky experiences?
I've seen some of these, and I consider these equivalent to chatbots or talking to the digital phone assistants and whatnot. You're going there to get an experience, interact with real people. Automating some of those aspects will negate the entire experience of eating out. So I'm not a big fan of these developments. And tracking aside, the experience is the key. And if it negates the experience, then you may be saving on labor costs and whatnot as a restaurant owner. Well, you'll likely see less customers too. So we got to look at that balance in a holistic way.
It seems like the idea of contactless, of course, went huge over the last year and a half because of the pandemic, and it made a lot of sense. But it seemed like contactless went from being first thought of as an important customer experience, almost now to a company's way to, surveil or at least capture data, which it, of course, then can become a surveillance thing. It just feels like, does it matter if it started out more as a customer need because they didn't want to touch, and now it went from that to more of, the more contactless we go, the more data we can collect, and the more potential surveillance can also happen.
Yeah, some of those menu as a service offerings, like it wasn't just like looking at the menu on your phone, but in order to place an order, you create a profile on the website, right? So then you enter your name, your email, your billing address, your credit card number, just to order the food. Contactless is great, maybe cleaner, and COVID scares and all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, now I have to make this profile that has linked my personal information, my purchase information, and my browsing information, just for getting like pizza or a burger or a sandwich or whatever I'm getting, right? It's unnecessary. But what Raju said is straight. Like, you go to a restaurant for the experience, and ultimately, like, the nicer the restaurant, the better the experience you want. But even like fast casual, could a robot make a taco for me probably in a line? Yeah, but is that really what I'm going for? No, like at that point, you might as well just get some prepackaged food somewhere and not really eat at a restaurant, right? Part of that is just the experience. I don't think you can tell the robot to add extra queso on top, right? Like, it's not unless it gets to that level of custom ordering. And then I guess kind of the last, maybe biggest news was there was an article about this. I want to say Catholic priest, maybe a priest, some religious guy, and basically, like, his information essentially came out that he was using some app and some website, like, basically bought data from some data brokerages, and it was supposedly anonymous data. And they bought like maybe a couple data sets essentially and put that data together. And then they were able to piece together where this guy was going, what type of activities he was doing, what apps he was using, and all this information. And then it kind of makes you think that, like, you're buying this, here you go, aggregated, or Brent, you want to run through it?
Yeah, that was a huge story. I know we really wanted to focus more on the details of the technology, as opposed to the kind of this, the salaciousness of what was happening. So basically, let's look at it like this: mobile phones and mobile apps. If you're not careful, they're tracking everything. And even when the app makers say they're anonymizing data, does that mean that if they anonymize it, the keys are there to de-anonymize it as well? And of course, the answer seems to be yes. And I kind of took some of the pieces of some of the stories around articles around this particular thing, and this just sort of stood out. Forms of aggregated anonymized user data can be bought and sold legally. Yeah, legally. So it's not an illegal thing going on. as long as it's stripped of directly identifiable info like name, address, phone number. But that data might even include device IDs, which can be connected to a particular phone and then to an owner if that same ID appears in other mobile data sets.
This
So
entire,
I think, yeah, Raju, you have a lot to say on this one.
this entire anonymization of the data is a misnomer. You should assume that, sure, the individual data set for that particular individual app or a device you're using, might be anonymized. But when you combine that with some other piece of information, then you're no longer anonymous. Let's take a simple example. Sites may say, hey, your location data is completely anonymous. Sure, maybe your name and phone number and all of that is not transmitted. But guess what? Your location data is tracked, and just is the case with this person out there. Your location data is tracked, and you go home every day, and that location data doesn't change for the most part. You know what your home is. You take that anonymous home data and look that up, do a reverse lookup of that location, and then you get your address where you get your name from, maybe the city or the county records and whatnot. And there it is. You put those one plus one together, and you have de-anonymized data. And it probably shouldn't take more than 2 minutes to put together or de-anonymize some of this piece of data. But of course, if the companies say they are taking your raw data, people won't allow access. So they have to kind of de-anonymize it for that particular purpose. But that is the reason, companies like data brokers exist, where they pull data from multiple sources, tie 1 plus 1 together and sell that data. And selling data is their business. And that identifying users is a huge business in itself. And that is what pretty much is the case with this particular person, with this priest. And this has been going on for years now.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of time we focus even at the app level, maybe, of apps people are using and the location that the app itself tracks on your phone or computer or whatever. But when I was going down the rabbit hole on this one, I saw an article, I think from back in 2018 on Ars Technica, and it was about how Verizon and AT&T basically sell your location data for your phone, to mobile advertisers and these data brokerages, right? And so, yeah, they supposedly stopped selling your phone's data in 2018. First of all, why did this even start, right? Like, how? I'm sure it was buried in some terms and conditions on my phone plan, right? But ultimately, if you want a cell phone in the States, Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, your only 3 options, right? Sprint got swallowed up, and every other minor carrier is just piggybacking on those major networks in the first place. And then that was in 2018, but then in 2021, earlier this year, there was a T-Mobile update that basically said they're going to start selling data again to advertisers. So basically, they just waited a couple of years till the media cycle went down, and then they're going to start it up again, and it'll be like an opt-out process that you have to say you don't want your data sold to. But at that point, that's straight at the phone location level, that they're, an app using it, not using it, maybe a VPN, you can try to protect yourself here and there. That's all, protective measures you can make, or conscious decisions. But ultimately, wherever you take your phone in your pocket, that's tracked and that's sold. Then, your phone location might as well be your person location, right? No one leaves it without more than 20 feet away from you at any given point, usually, right? So, yeah, I mean, at the network level, it's tracked and sold and shared, and you can't really do much about that one either, right? So that's even higher. But Brent, that article you flipped up there on the New York Times one, that was a crazy one too.
The 12 million.
Yeah. What do you call it? This one was tracking like senators and generals and government officials going back and forth between the Pentagon and like the White House and Congress and all sorts of craziness. It's a long article, but it's a really good one about just how this information was tracked and then essentially de-anonymized, because it was just location data and that was it. But like Raju mentioned, like once you know somebody where they spend 6 hours a night, between midnight and 6 a.m. probably, and they're stand still, and that location hasn't changed. I got a pretty good idea that's their house, and then everything else is basically a free for all at that point, right?
Yeah, and I'm pulling up this. I found this. It's not just about mobile, but of course mobile plays a big part of it. But and financial information as core, of course, that plays a big part of it. But I found this article, and it talks about, and this is in the context of health data, and we all know how incredibly important our health is, and being able to have the right data in the right hands hopefully will help us maximize our health. Well, of course, whenever that data gets created and digitized, well, guess what? It's apparently it's fair game. And so I found this article, and I kind of love this quote: "De-identification is not anonymization." And I think a lot of people kind of think, oh, well, if you wipe off the identification number, it's anonymous. But as we can see, it's kind of easy to piece these things together. And the other part of this, the potential for re-identification of de-identified patient records by combining de-identified data with other data sources such as voter rolls and other publicly available information. It's not rocket science. It's actually becoming, it seems like, more of the norm than not the norm.
Did you see that thing about the startup? I think TrueVeta. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but basically it was some company, I think based in Seattle or something like that, and these guys raised I think close to $100 million, and their entire business is selling quote anonymized health data, and it was something like 15% of. They basically tap into like electronic health records and make partnerships with hospitals and stuff around the country. And hospitals are obviously, I would say, bundling a lot. And there's major providers that now operate a good chunk of the hospital infrastructure around the country. And then those guys make partnerships with these people for data sharing, and then this anonymous data. I mean, ultimately, just think about it. You're raising 100 million to sell anonymous health data, supposedly. And now that health data is going to what? Is it going to researchers? Great. What do you need $100 million to sell it, to give your data to researchers for, right? That $100 million isn't free. Like, there's going to be a return there somewhere, right? And I mean, maybe it's for marketing, maybe it's for whatever. I didn't dig down the rabbit hole on this one. But basically to collect tens of millions of patients' information across pretty much every state in the country. And that's $100 million investment. So I don't know what they're valued at, but obviously a lot more than that.
What about the fact that do you think a lot of people mistake de-identification for anonymization?
It is.
I think yeah. Go ahead, Roger.
And if you peel on in, there are a lot of people that think, I'm in incognito mode, and they think it cannot be tracked. That's not true. Like, for example, that is why the fingerprinting and all of that do exist to basically identify you. And the flock is essentially another version of that, right? And again, you can go into those details, but the idea is they think it cannot be identified, or if you are in that incognito mode or anonymized. But that's definitely not true, and people can be identified if you just tie one plus one together. Now, let me explain that. For example, let's say you install Chrome. Picking Chrome because one, it has the largest market share, and two, it's software by an ad company. So if you look at Chrome, or not just Chrome, every software or every browser, for example, it comes with an ID. Every device has an ID. The ID is needed because with every software install has a unique ID. The ID is needed because you have to, push updates, software updates, and maybe synchronize. If you're logged in, you have to synchronize and whatnot. Which means no matter how many windows you have, no matter how many incognito windows you have, that install has one ID. So your incognito window in Chrome still has an ID associated with it at the backend on Google's end, right? So which means no matter what you do, that information is available. Whether you do it in a regular mode or incognito mode, that information is available. All you need to do is probably sign into your Google account once in the lifetime of that install. Once. So which means your profile as an individual is tied to the ID of the browser. And then they know that they can tie these two things together and identify you. So people think them opening an incognito window, it cannot be tracked and whatnot. Well, not really true. Google can track it. Whether they do it or not, again, only Google knows that. Of course, they're not going to share that information. But if they're tracking, which is highly likely, they're probably using that information for some purposes. If they're not tracking, will they not track? Well, maybe they're a couple of bad quarters away from tracking. So we'll have to see how that information is going to be used. But it is a misnomer that people think if you're not logged into your account, you cannot be tracked. If you clear your cookies, you cannot be tracked. There are various ways like fingerprinting and other ways to track users. Just because you're using an incognito mode in a browser, or you're not sending certain piece of information to a particular provider, doesn't mean that that data cannot be used to associate and add additional piece of data from other sources to pinpoint at you.
Yeah, I mean, the Chrome thing, I mean, maybe I wouldn't really call it to Google's defense, but like even when you open a Chrome tab, I just pulled one up here, right? So it says Chrome won't save the following information: your browsing history, cookies and site data, and information entered into forms. Your activity still might be visible to websites you visit, your employer, your school, or your internet service provider, right? So your ISP already knows everything you're doing no matter what, regardless if you're incognito or not, right? Employer or school, I think that just means whatever network you're connected to, which naturally makes sense. But websites you visit, if on a couple of shows before, we talked about Google Analytics being on something like 90+% of websites, right? So the websites you visit, Google knows exactly what it is. All incognito does is basically not save your history locally on that device. So when someone else in your family goes and uses the browser, they won't know what websites you use. Otherwise, the tracking is pretty much full on from essentially the server side or the vendor side, but just not maybe stored locally in your history tab. And I think it says in here on the page, now you can browse privately and other people who use this device won't see your activity, which technically is true, but I guess maybe, I wouldn't say people are brainwashed, but people definitely have the assumption that, I'm sure if you ask random people on the street, does incognito protect your privacy? They would say yes, but it's really unfounded because it's just not saving your history locally, and that's the extent of it. So incognito doesn't.
And there, to add to that, as you type, a lot of people have this auto suggestions enabled. As you type, there is suggestion. That means every keystroke is actually going to the server, and the suggestion is coming from the default search engine you pick. So which means by default, every keystroke is being tracked, and they can use that. And that is the information they actually, include for this flock ID and whatnot. Just like the concept of flock is basically around pulling all this information together and identifying or grouping you into clusters. But nobody has details on what the size of the cluster is, and it is possible that the size of the cluster is just with one person, where you can really pinpoint to that particular person. But again, all this information, including the websites you visit, your history and whatnot, is used. But then even when it comes to fingerprinting, there are other things that are used too. When you could be going on a incognito window, but there are other fingerprinting methods that are used to identify, be it your screen resolution, the fonts you have in your system. You may not reveal the browser, but there are various tricks, like how each browser behaves and renders certain graphics certain way. So based on that, they determine which browser you're using. Similarly, what extensions you have installed on your browser, how many extensions. And it could even be what kind of media media files a browser can play. So if you combine all of these, like the graphic processor you're using and whatnot, if you combine all of this, you can limit and target to a small subset of users, if not a target of one. So which means you really don't have to provide all this information anonymously. There are other ways these vendors do track you, and they can really pinpoint to you the individual.
So interesting and so much to learn about this stuff. Tejas, I hate to do this, but I want to throw something out to you guys. I do this every week. I know.
I thought you were going to put that picture back up. Okay, good. I think it's a question. That's fine.
Don't give me any thoughts, man. There's a button to push away. I wanted to talk about this because this is one of those that we could have gone forever on this one too. I think, but TechDirt, and that's TechDirt is a it's a good site. I go to it a lot. And it's a online publication. It focuses a lot on, of course, what's going on in the tech world. But this just caught my attention. I wanted to talk to you guys about it. TechDirt is now gone Google free. I mean, no ads, no tracking. And I think this is really the first one of these online publication sites that I've actually seen do this. And one of the things they mentioned is that they had some issues about some of their ads were getting pulled off. Well, we had to pull ads off of TechDirt because Google kept, saying that these are like bad ads and they didn't want to, serve them up. But as they put in quotes, apparently these are articles that had something negative to say about Google. Apparently that caused some issue there. But what I pulled out a couple of things that I thought we'd be able to talk about. It says Google Analytics worked well for them, decently well, which means, they were making money using the data or having the data being used. But using Google Ads came, for free, came with a price tag, of course. Google was tracking users on our site. That was becoming both more and more problematic. But then here's the other piece before I throw it over to you guys. Say, hey, of course, this means pulling on all the Google's, tracking stuff. I mean, they're going to be losing revenue, and that's their business advertising. It's hit on their revenue. But they were saying at a time when it's under threat from, what's going on, generically speaking, but they're hoping to try some more creative, less intrusive, less annoying sponsorship and advertising methods in the near future. So my question to you guys is this a one-off, or is this a start of a trend that we're going to see folks like TechDirt? There's so many online publications, too many to name, of course. But do you see TechDirt being a leader in a movement, or are they an anomaly that's, people are just going to say this is not going to work and we'll stick to what we're doing?
I expect this to take off. The number of trackers on a site is going to be a metric that is going to be highlighted. And just like your remote trackers, and there are other sites as well. I've seen Basecamp remove the trackers out there, and TechDirt, and then there are several other sites that I expect them to follow. How extensive? I don't know. Frankly, again, that's really a tough call because it impacts the bottom line, it impacts the revenue. So it is going to be difficult for companies whose business model is advertising, and getting rid of Google and all of the trackers is the right move. And are they willing to make that move and take that hit? It varies by institution to institution. But certainly, I think I respect Mike and his team because, one, it is not just them removing it. It is basically they are helping their users not being tracked, because at the end of the day, their users were being tracked and they are not even being informed about it. And so the fact that they removed these trackers means they are also taking care of the users. So I certainly commend Mike and his team, and this is the early phases of what we are about to see, in my view.
Yeah, I think I want to say it's like this kind of popular old Paul Graham thing where he was talking about industries basically bundle and unbundle. And for advertising for a long time, we've seen this bundling in Google where you're basically just outsourcing all revenue generation, basically, which is kind of crazy to think about it from a business perspective. My entire revenue model is based on some third-party company that I have no control over, and that can basically turn on and off the lever whenever they feel like it. Like the TechDirt article, when they originally pulled the ads off, it was, I think Google flagged the page, which was just the search results, like in the top right corner. If you click on search and go into it and you search Google, they flagged that search results page as malicious and like misleading. And basically, if your page is like, has bad content on it or something like that, then they won't serve ads on it, essentially. And so just a search results page was apparently bad enough. But obviously, these guys are writing things that are critical about Google, and obviously for pretty good reason here. But the second half of it is, yeah, I mean, when you're outsourcing your entire revenue model, it's not a very good, I would say, revenue model maybe in the first place. And then these companies, I think ones with, strong convictions and backbones and that are not willing to basically do the rat race forever, they're going to build out their own expertise and build up their own advertising teams and build their own, internal tools that take control of that information a lot better, which I think ultimately will be good. I mean, maybe from an advertiser point of view, it might be a little bit more fragmented and you might have to jump through a few more hoops and you don't have one place to go through to target around the entire internet. But, I think a lot of times, just like we talked about last time, where states are going to be, people will choose to live in a state with strong privacy practices. People will identify with brands that advertise on sites that have good things as well, right? There was a big lashback, or what do you call lashback, whatever, on sites that like advertised on like maybe far left or far right websites, right? And then those advertisers would be like, I don't want to be on those sites anymore, right? Same way, a company that has, or a site that has a good set of moral standards like TechDirt had when they showed right here, that's a company I want to advertise with, or that's a brand that I want to be associated with. And maybe I'll pump more advertising dollars there rather than Google, right? Because you'll identify with that morality a lot more.
Yeah, I love what he said here. We are hoping to try some more creative, less intrusive, less annoying sponsorship and advertising methods in the near future. I have a suspicion that as people get more and more comfortable or more knowledgeable about what's going on with this data, I suspect they're going to be able to find some folks that want to align with what they've put out there. And yeah, I would like to think that this is the beginning. It may be just a very, very small baby step in where we need to go. But when I saw this, I immediately said, wow, would we have seen this 2 years ago? Would we have seen it maybe not even a year ago? But I think this has the potential to be a beginning, a small step for mankind, or how does that go? A giant leap a small step for man, a giant leap for mankind. Maybe this is a small step for privacy and a giant leap for, I don't know, privacy kind. I don't know how you want to put it.
I think the point Tejas made about outsourcing the revenue generation is an extremely important one, particularly for content creators. Everyone in the context of content creation outsource their revenue generation model. So, which means someone else controls their destiny. And you notice this all over. I mean, take something like this, YouTube, right? Well, all YouTubers outsource their revenue generation. Imagine if YouTube changes their model and
Which
say
this,
and that changes everything, right? So from a business point of view, you want to control where your business is coming from. Today they do not have any control. I think that shift is fundamental. That shift will happen. It's like not controlling your supply chain, right? Not controlling, if you don't control your supply chain, well, you will not be able to control your business. So the same way in this case, if you don't know where the revenue is coming from, and that resilience will be lost for every business. So during this phase, while everyone is thinking about resilience, then what parts of the supply chain do you control? In this case, the revenue chain do you control is an important piece. And in a lot of these cases, they have outsourced that revenue generation to ad companies, and some of them will start to take back that control. And what TechDirt essentially is showing is a new way of that. So I really commend them.
Yeah, I mean, exactly on the YouTube and content creators piece you were talking about. I mean, I think that's why we see the rise of Substack and Patreon and a lot of these more content creator direct to their constituents models building up. There's a lot of platforms that are basically like YouTube rivals, where you subscribe and that's your community, and you build that because like at the end of the day, YouTube can demonetize you, take you out, pull your account down, suspend you. You probably deal with the bot until you can, maybe raise enough hell to get some assistance and maybe plead your case. But I mean, we've seen accounts on all ends of the spectrum basically taking out scientists or political or entertainers or whatever, right? So I don't think anyone's really safe, and really being able to control the distribution. And I mean, it just sounds so crazy, not controlling how you make money, right? I mean, there's a platform effects, but then you don't. And it's so crazy that even I think the Facebook newsletter thing they're trying to launch, they're going to let content creators, own their mailing list basically, or own the data for the people that subscribe to them. Now, if you get Facebook to basically play this game and say, we're going to give you the data when they don't want to give anybody data for any reason, that's when even they see that there is a little shift happening here. And maybe we might see it with Google too, but I think there is awareness on this kind of controlling your own destiny piece. And that's really important for everybody, I guess.
Absolutely.
I think we can probably wrap though. We're close on time. Let's see. Yeah, that's
I
it.
have a great way to end it. I got a great way to end it.
No.
This.
I saw that coming.
You brought it up, man.
All right, I should have cut this off 30 seconds ago. Anyways, thanks for joining in. Next week we'll probably be back on Friday's regular scheduled programming. And yeah, hope you learned something new. And it was great talking to y'all. See y'all next week.